The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable. Allez, c'est parti. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome to Sing With Your Feet, the podcast in which we give careful thought to the way we interact with others so that our hearts always stay in the right place. The podcast in which any impetus that is not pure joy is examined to make sure that we never lose sight of our why. The podcast in which we look at life and death as two intertwined and related issues. Because giving some thought about our relationship to death helps us make the most of our relationships in the moment. My name is Lily Fields, and I'm going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. Lila Kelly, death doula, and your wicked stepsister will be here a little later in the episode, and what she has to talk to you about today is intriguing and maybe a little bit disturbing at first, but it is worth sticking around for. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about relationships. Relationships are one of the 19 ideal life circles that form the exquisite Venn diagrams of our lives. Over the last few weeks, we've been taking a look at that Venn diagram and how some of the circles overlap in ways unique to each of us. For example, we've looked at the overlaps of topics as varied as sexuality and spirituality, or parenting and keeping a clean house, or personal style and mental health. This theme, relationships, is one of three that deal with other people and how they fit into our lives. There's the theme of parenting, which we talked about in episode 18, which has to do with us and our children, and marriage, which we will talk about in episode 28, which is going to be our first episode back after the summer break. These are definitely three different things: parenting, marriage, and then all of the other relationships, as vague as that may sound. Any relationship with anyone outside of the people who live immediately in our household. You may find this a little bit complicated, and you just want to have one circle in your Venn diagram for all of your relationships. Or on the other hand, you might want to break it down even further. It's going to be your work relationships, your relationships with your own parents, relationships with your neighbors, or any other important relationships in your life. There's no right or wrong number of circles in your Venn diagram. The important thing is that you actually take the time each day to think about your ideal life, how it's going, concentrating on one circle at a time and asking yourself questions about it. We'll review those questions at the end of the episode. In our effort to articulate our ideal life, I suggested that you respond to a prompt which says, "In my ideal life, I am a person who." This prompt doesn't ask us to think about what we would be doing or what we would have in our ideal life necessarily, but what kind of person we would be. This is important because many of the things we dream of doing in our ideal life, while they may be exciting and important, are limited by the kind of people that we are. Saying, "In my ideal life, I have friends who support me," is great, but eventually, if after a long, long time we end up with stunted and broken relationships, the question becomes, who do I need to be to have friends who support me? That who I need to be is the line of thinking that we want to follow when we're thinking about relationships. So here are a few of my statements. In my ideal life, I am a person who knows how to say no, doesn't get caught up in other people's drama, can listen without trying to find solutions, accepts a no without overanalyzing, doesn't have to constantly entertain everyone, feels no need to make excuses when I want to leave somewhere, isn't afraid to speak her mind out loud. In my ideal life, I am a person who knows that people who are angry are not necessarily angry at me. I am thoughtful about gift giving. I don't immediately assume that I've done something wrong when someone important wants to talk to me. And I'm a person who stays in touch with the people I love. Each one of us will come at this topic with our own shadowy darknesses. I know that if you don't struggle with setting boundaries or with saying no, then everything I'm about to say over the next few minutes will go in one ear and out the other, and that's fine. But if you, like me, struggle with boundaries and the vaguest possibility that you might disappoint someone, then let's get started. I'm not going to shock you here when I tell you that the overarching principle that should guide our relationships, whether they're with our children, or a spouse, or with anyone else, should always be the golden rule. In case you need a little reminder on what the golden rule says, love your neighbor as yourself and do for others as you would want done for you. The simplicity of this gets lost in translation. Sometimes we find ourselves out of love with ourselves, and then it's incredibly hard to put love into action when our most intimate relationship, the one with ourselves, is built on self-judgment, self-criticism, and self-loathing. It literally does not compute when you are someone who has no self-respect that who you are is worth protecting by being careful about how much of yourself you give away. I've gone through periods of my life when I have essentially handed over a pen to other people and let them fill in my calendar for me. Anything anyone asked me to do, I would say yes, because I did not know that I had a right to say no. While from the outside, this might sound like an altruist talking about how kind and generous she is, let me tell you that from the inside, it was a cauldron of guilt, anger, anxiety, exhaustion, and frustration. I'm probably going to end up saying this a dozen times, but guilt is never a reason to do anything. Guilt is a red flag. Guilt is a relational cancer that says, I owe you something that I cannot repay, but I just have to keep trying. Maybe I do, and maybe I don't. But it is a vicious cycle that robs us of our potential for joy because we keep trying to repay with our time, our talent, or our treasure. We're trying to repay something that cannot be repaid. The futility of the whole enterprise leaves us feeling unhappy and unsatisfied. The feeling of guilt should never be a reason to do anything. Now, let me get down into the nitty-gritty for a second here, because there is a feeling that manifests itself in a very similar way to guilt that we need to look at, but it is something that is much healthier. That is a feeling of duty. Duty is a very important why that can be a reason for doing things that we don't want to do. Duty is born out of compassion and out of a desire to contribute to improving something for someone we love, or for a group, or for an animal, or for a plant, as you will see later. Compassion is a virtue, which the philosopher Princess defines as love in action. The way duty makes us act and the way guilt makes us act, they are ostensibly the same thing. They cause us to do things that we don't necessarily really want to do. Duty, however, as it takes its root not in a vicious cycle of indebtedness, but rather in love, and more specifically, love in action, it has the potential to bring us joy. Just to kick up a little bit more dust on the topic, if we have convinced ourselves that we're acting out of duty and not out of guilt, then we need to consider something else. Is the action that we're contemplating actually our duty, or is it someone else's duty that we've taken on unjustly? As humans, we are very good at taking the temperature of justice. When something feels unfair to us, we get uncomfortable. Sometimes our role is not to deal with the situation directly, because maybe we are simply not equipped to handle it. But our role might be to take the situation to people who can deal with it. In this case, the best, most compassionate course of action is to get someone involved who can do something. Guilt is the worst possible reason to do anything. Here's why. Let's go back to the golden rule. Do for others as you would want done for you. Guilt is a dirty little secret that can, after the fact, rot a relationship. We'll talk about secrets in a minute. But if the only reason I can find to do something is guilt, then I need to learn how to impose a boundary, a limit, That means I need to learn how to disappoint people. I need to learn how to say no. Likewise, if I want things done for me with joy, then I need to uncover joy-filled whys to be my impetus for my actions. In a future episode, when we talk about commitments, I will come back to the idea that we must only commit to things that make us feel alive. Learning how to resist and decline commitments that leave us tepid, it's a whole thing. But the number one rule is that guilt is never a reason to do anything. Our incessant need to repay someone for a debt, real or imagined, that we cannot humanly repay, it's a self-worth problem. Guilt is evidence of a self-esteem issue. I'll come back to this too in a minute, but first, how does the golden rule fit into all this? Well, consider this. If in your dealings with other people, you knew that they were tepid and were only acting out of a place of guilt, how would that hit you? I'm guessing that it wouldn't be something that you would love to know. Knowing that someone is only helping you because they don't respect themselves enough to draw a boundary, or that they feel like they owe you something. A system of indebtedness does not a healthy relationship make. In this, if we want to do for others as we want done for us, we need to be clear with ourselves as to why we are taking any specific action. And whenever possible, we need to make sure that our why is from a positive place. Love is always a good place to start. If you struggle with saying no, then may I humbly suggest that you need to start loving yourself better. You might need some counseling to help you get down to the root of your feeling of eternal indebtedness and your need to please. If this is a point of struggle for you, please get professional help. Do not spend all of your life handing over a permanent marker to others for them to fill in your calendar or spend your money for you, doing things that you don't want to do and that make you feel unhappy. Time is the one resource you will never get any more of. Use it wisely. And incidentally, getting counseling is a really good use of your time. My family lives in a smallish apartment on the 4th floor of a 5-story apartment building. There are 35 units in our building. Our building is from the 1950s, designed by a student of Le Corbusier, and it's on the Register of Historic Landmarks. It was and has always been public housing. Our entire neighborhood in this little town in France was destroyed during the Second World War, and new housing was needed, and quickly. There were lots and lots of ideas at the time about how public housing could, and theoretically should be, beautiful. Our building is beautiful in a 1950s kind of way, but having been built quickly during the housing boom, it quickly fell into disrepair. In the mid-aughts, there was a project to renovate it. At the time, there were people living in the building, and most of them moved out. Only one person stayed through the renovation. He was an older man, polite, courteous, discreet, always nicely dressed. I was impressed that he loved this building so much that he was willing to put up with the dust of more than 2 years' worth of construction work to be able to continue living here. Long story longer, I was in town a few years ago and I ran across this gentleman. He was smoking a cigarette when I saw him, and he quickly moved to hide the cigarette from me when we greeted one another, as if he was embarrassed by it. I'm not offended by smokers as a general rule, but I thought that this was just one more way that he was trying to be discreet. Shh, he said to me confidentially about the cigarette. This is our little secret. Your secret is safe with me, I replied. The years passed, and he died a little bit more than a month ago. I'm rather certain that his passing had nothing to do with cigarettes, by the way. He was just a really old man. About 2 weeks ago, his children came to the building to start emptying out his apartment. I didn't know this, however, at least not at first. What I did notice was that the hallways of our building were filled, absolutely thick, with the stale smell of cigarettes. It was overwhelming. It turned out that as his children were emptying out the apartment, they had to put his furniture into the elevator to get it down to their U-Haul. Every piece of his furniture had been saturated by the smell of cigarette smoke. What had once been a dirty little secret was out in the open now, and it overtook the whole building for days. I have all kinds of thoughts about this, but one of them seems particularly important to our discussion of relationships. When we arrive at the end of our lives, people will remember us according to the kind of relationship we had with them. In this case, he was a nice enough neighbor, discreet and courteous. But my last memory of him is this terrible, awful smell that filled our building for days. His secret tainted what could have been a nearly flawless legacy. I don't judge him for smoking. It doesn't make him any less kind or courteous, but I will always remember that smell when I think of him. When it comes to relationships, secrets stink. Especially secrets that we feel compelled to keep wrapped up tightly. At some point, they will eke out, and even if they don't destroy the relationship, which some secrets could, they can leave an unpleasant memory in their wake. When it comes to relationships, please consider this. Knowing yourself and being lucid, honest, and transparent about where you are not living up to your ideal life can help you deal with those secrets so that they don't cause damage later on. We've previously talked about how carrying around undealt with anger from season to season of our lives, it distances us from the source of the original anger, leaving us irritable and uncomfortable, but without an immediate cause. May I humbly suggest that this is the same with secrets. Secrets that we keep about ourselves and our own lack of virtue are damaging enough in the way that they impact our behaviors and our reactions. Over time and over generations, this can be compounded as family secrets, the details of which are lost, but the impact can still be felt. A great-grandparent who had a child out of wedlock, which at the time was a gigantic shame on the family name, or a great-great-grandparent who had 2 families and attempted to hide it. Those kind of secrets forge deep ruts in the psyches of a family. We cannot undo the secrets of the past, but we can keep new secrets from affecting the generations that follow us. Again, counseling is a way to tease out some of the damage done by secrets of the past. Resolving the conflicts that secrets can cause can ease our relationships now. And relationships are what we're here to talk about in the first place. But please, for you, for yourself, for your relationship with yourself, and the relationships that are important to you, stop keeping secrets.
Elle me fait bondir et vibrer, crier. Elle me donne envie de chanter, danser. Elle pousse à agir, donner, partager. Et tout simplement de sourire, aimer.
All right, so I have made this sound pretty dire, haven't I? 2 topics in the realm of relationships that are not very joyful. Learning to set boundaries and dealing with secrets that rot our relationships. But I do want to give us some hope. Remember I told you about that neighbor who died? Well, something happened while his children were moving out his things. And it was that they left a number of things by the dumpster. These were items they esteemed to be of no value, but apparently they couldn't be bothered to actually put the items in the dumpster. So these items just sat there for days and days. And one of these items was a plant. It was kind of a palm tree-ish kind of thing. Over the course of the days it was by the dumpster, someone actually took the pot it had been living in, and it left this poor plant to die a lonely death next to the dumpster. One day last week, after seeing it for the nth day in a row, my husband said to me, I just can't stand seeing that plant that way. I happened to have seen it that very day, and I actually had thought about it too. It broke my heart, but I didn't think we had a pot to put it in. Besides, this thing was nearly dead. All right, I can't stand it either, but what can we do? I replied. My husband went down to our basement storage unit and rummaged around until he found an old IKEA pot. I had completely forgotten about this pot. I hadn't seen it in more than 10 years. So he brought up the plant, which looked really pathetic and almost dead. We prepared the pot together, putting some stones that our scalawags had gathered in the park at the bottom for drainage, and then some unwashably filthy wool from a fleece that I had been given recently. Our veggie composter had yielded several liters of really good compost, so he threw that in too, and my husband lovingly placed the plant in the pot and then filled the rest with regular potting soil. He took the plant to its new home out in our beautiful hallway of our 1950s historic landmark building, and then he watered it. It was kind of a solemn moment. The compassion with which my husband had invested in that rather ugly, scraggly potted plant moved me to the core. Life deserves better than to dry out and shrivel up next to a dumpster from lack of care. Relationships are the care that keep people from drying out and shriveling up. Not all of our relationships need the equivalent of a daily watering. Some might just be a one-time experience, like the stones in the bottom of a pot for drainage, or the wool. These stones have a story, and they will remain in that pot forever. The wool will likely disintegrate over time, but it has a part to play in the story of the resurrection of this plant, too. There will be more veggie compost in years to come, but it won't be for a long time. When you think about your relationships, consider this. What role do you play? Is that relationship a daily or a weekly part of your life? Is it a yearly investment that you make? Is it a once-in-a-lifetime but unfading part? Is it something you enjoyed once and then can let fade into memory? The next morning, my husband and I eagerly snuck out into the hallway to check on our new little friend. It had perked up nicely. It still wasn't a beautiful plant, but it was alive. Its leaves were no longer droopy. It was such a touching reminder of how little it takes to cultivate life. I caught myself wishing that all relationships were so easy. They aren't, and I know that. I'm not naive. People are not nearly as easy to deal with as plants are. I mean, people are prickly. People have their pride and their annoying habits, and sometimes they chew loudly. But the lesson I walked away with is this. When investing in a relationship brings us joy, and we invest in it with the tools and treasures that we have available to us, everyone comes away more alive. Lila Kelly, your wicked stepsister, is also a death doula, meaning that she accompanies people who are facing end-of-life issues. Today, she draws a direct line between relationships and death, and it is a doozy. With that, Lila, the floor is yours.
Let's start with something deeply unpleasant, perhaps a bit gruesome. Corpse meditation. What, pray tell, is corpse meditation? Whatever you're imagining probably isn't too far off. Corpse meditation is mostly practiced in Thailand and Southeast Asia by Buddhist monks. It's a practice of death awareness, a meditation on death with the goal of improving your relationship with death. The idea is that deepening your appreciation of mortality will lessen anxiety associated with death and enhance your engagement with life. A monk who is a practitioner of corpse meditation has this to say: "We are obsessed with externals. No one wants to see the internals, but we try to see them in an equal light, neither delighting nor being repelled by the attractive or unattractive signs of the external or internal." He further explains, corpse contemplation or corpse meditation would be just literally meditating on a picture of a dead body or a body at one of the actual stages of decomposition. Alrighty then. That is one way to improve your relationship with death. Though corpse meditation isn't meant to be macabre or morbid, the idea of contemplating a decomposing corpse is a significant departure from our Western culture that has been socialized to avoid death. So let's put this into a context that we Westerners can better relate to. Terror management theory. Admittedly, the word terror doesn't instill much confidence, but terror management theory, and this is very simplified, is a fancy way to explain the relationship that many of us have with death. It stems from the idea that we have an inner conflict whereby our instinct for self-preservation collides with our understood inevitability of death, which leads us to develop coping mechanisms such as avoidance and escapism. As you know, healthy relationships aren't based on avoidance and escapism. In an attempt to improve our relationship, how can we engage with death in a way that aligns with our values and is relatively comfortable for us? At least more comfortable than spending time up close and personal with a decomposing corpse. We could start here. Death awareness, or the recognition of our own impermanence. Consider these statements. Just like everyone, I age. Just like everyone, I get sick. Just like everyone, I suffer loss. Just like everyone, I fall victim to accidents. Just like everyone, I die. This exercise encourages us to recognize that death is an even playing field. When it comes to mortality, no matter who we are, where we live, our bank accounts, or our culture, the mortality rate for the human species remains at a whopping 100%. Now that we've recognized that we're all in the same boat, we can advance our relationship with our eventual death by planning for the future. Here are 5 strategies that I recently found in an article, and since I am your wicked stepsister and we've been hanging out, these ideas may sound familiar. Number 1, take care of your paperwork. You know, advance directives, end-of-life planning, that stuff. Number 2, continue to improve your comfort with your mortality. Ponder questions like, if I had little time left, what would I do and why? Number 3, talking about death won't kill you. Have conversations with others about what you've learned and the plans you've made. Normalize the conversation. Number 4, consider your personal vision of good death. That sounds an awful lot like, in my ideal death, I am a person who what? Number 5, make a plan to go out in style. Investigate your options, educate yourself, and find the practices that align with your own personal beliefs and style. Once we get through that entire checklist and our relationship with death has gotten to a place of relative comfort, here's something kind of fun that you can explore. Memento mori. In Latin, it means remember that you will die, or remember to die. Memento mori comes in all sorts of artistic and symbolic forms. It became very popular between the 16th and 18th centuries. It was appearing on tombs, in paintings, on church walls, in jewelry. Once you know what you're looking for, you'll find depictions all over the place. Who knows? You may be surrounded by reminders of death and not even realize it. Start looking around and see what you can find. And then maybe you could start talking about it, because as you know, talking about death won't kill you. I promise.
Thank you so much, Layla. You know, just last week, I was explaining the concept of memento mori to my little boys because they got it in their little heads that skulls were reserved only for Halloween and pirate flags. I got lost on a tangent about poor Yorick with them before I realized that I had perhaps gone too far. But you're right. We need to be on the lookout for these things, and they definitely won't kill us. I'll put a link to Layla's website in the show notes. Let's take a minute to review the 4 questions we ask for each of our ideal life categories on the theme of relationships. What's working? Are you able to keep a good balance in your relationships? Or maybe you had some time to be with some of your friends in a way that brought you a ton of joy. This is fantastic. Celebrate this. What isn't working? Is there an imbalance in some of your friendships that is making you feel uncomfortable? Are you struggling with saying no? Or have you been feeling guilty lately in your relationships? This is part of the process, but do not stop there. Get curious about this. Things to consider. Where is that imbalance coming from? Do you want a relationship more than your friend is willing to give? Or do you have a hard time telling your grandmother no when she asks you to come over for lunch for the 3rd time this week? Keep asking yourself why until you get to something that you can act on. Are there relationships in which you're mistaking duty and guilt? Take a deep dive into those relationships. And lastly, things to do. If, in general, you struggle with relationships, it might be time for you to start thinking about working on yourself. How can you start loving yourself so that your relationships are built on a healthy foundation? Get counseling. It can only help. I know that for an episode about relationships, I didn't actually talk much about relationships. We only bring to a relationship the time that we have, the talent and the interests that we have, and the resources that we have. We cannot bring to a relationship what we do not have. Do not allow yourself to feel indebted because what you have is not sufficient for the other party in a relationship. This will lead to you feeling guilty about something that you cannot control. No one has a right to take from our resources of time, talent, and treasure without our permission. Loving and respecting yourself is the first step in learning to say no. When you get to a place where you love and respect yourself, all the other aspects of relationships, and especially the golden rule, will start to make more sense. I believe in you. I believe in your ability to invest who you are in making this world a better place, and that your relationships are one way you will make that happen. First things first, though, my dear. You must love yourself before you can love others. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your podcatcher, and please, if you enjoy something you've heard here, please share it with someone you think could use a fairy godmother too. A great big thank you to 7 Productions here in Mulhouse, France for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro to the show. Also thanks to Matt Kugler who sang it, and to Claude Ekwe who wrote it. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it's never too late to start singing with your feet.